here and them opening their doors us for this special event. What we're trying to accomplish, I'll say a few remarks and then turn it over to Stuart to help run this. But what we've recognized the Commission has been offering us over the last several months, we realize that there are some of these issues that are just too deep to do real justice with just having you during commission meeting settings, right, to offer you information, give you a chance to question our folks. To be there to interact with during the commission setting. So we really appreciate you. See Commissioner Gefeller on the video. So this is open to the public, but the rules of the road our intent is for this to be a session where the commission can interact with our professional staff and give them a chance to regulations and our opportunities here in Kansas, give you a chance to ask them any questions you can imagine and really dig into this deeper than we can during a normal commission meeting. Obviously, this isn't an official meeting of the commission. Everybody understands that. Yet we wanted to open to the public so it was clear you all are gathered together. We're not making decisions, but we are trying to inform ourselves. So we want to make it open to you for that. The public has been invited, but this conversation between the commission and our staff today. That's enough for us to accomplish. We are scheduled to go till 11 o'clock. However, we've got our bosses here and we've got our expert staff. And so if you determine at 11 that you'd like to continue for a while, there's space to do that, still get a break for lunch before the commission meeting starts at 1. So with that, I would ask if there's any questions. Okay, and I would turn it over to Stuart.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, commissioners. I appreciate your willingness to take the time and sit down with us. And this stems from back in early April. I conducted a public lands Zoom meeting with my staff, specifically wetland managers, and invited Secretary Levis and Assistant Secretary Miller to be included on that Zoom. And basically what I did was I started off just asking a set of questions to each wetland manager, and we're focusing on 5 of the main wetlands, public owned wetlands here in the state. Initially here, and it kind of relates back to my presentation at the last commission meeting. A lot of the data you have in your packets is derived from that presentation. But we found that it was a really, it was a good exercise internally for what we were looking at that relayed back to the questions that you all had. And so we kind of wanted to duplicate that exercise here today for you and open up the dialogue. I want this to be a relaxed, open dialogue session between us and you. And so we're, kind of like we did back in April, we're going to go property by property, manager by manager. And you all will have the opportunity to ask questions for each of the managers as we go along. And I'd like to start off just by introducing staff. And so from my right on the end there is Jason Black. He's manager of McPherson Valley Wetlands. And then next to him is Jason Wagner, manager of Cheyenne Bottoms. We've got Rob Unruh from Jamestown, Matt Farmer from Jamestown, Travis Ratliff from Neosho, Monty Manbeck from Neosho, Jacob Coulter from Maritazine, and then, of course, Assistant Secretary Mike Miller and Secretary Brad Lovelace. Since we're going to be talking about and relaying back to a lot of data that you have in your packet today, birds per hunter, things like that, I wanted to start off with by bringing Mike Nyhoff, our regional public land supervisor out of Hayes up here to give a demonstration on where we derive this data, and that's all from our checkout and the data that we collect and the things we garnish from this system. So Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Our electronic daily hunt check-in started in 2014. I apologize. Speaker system in there. There we go. When we started iSportsman, we put together the bid specs and we put together everything else. We wanted to follow after and go this electronic way. And just so you know, together, he handled the bids and everything else through it. And right before right after the bids were awarded, but before we started the program, John Solofsky left for Texas. So the agency looked around and said, who's the oldest guy we have in public lands who still carries a flip phone and can run our electronic system? And so I got put in charge of that. Anyhow, our iSportsman is what we call it. That's the company's name of it. The bottom line is a catchphrase John Solofsky developed: you can't manage what you do not measure. And that's kind of the creed that we have. We're trying to gather information on our public lands. Next, Jason. So the history is if you go back in forever, waterfowl areas, Cheyenne Bottoms, Meridazine, they've had check-in systems where people gathered in the dark and hunters came in, they were allowed in, they came back out, and they reported what they harvested. Over time, inefficient, I guess you would say. And so we discontinued that. The next thing that we went to were paper cards, where a hunter came in, got a card, filled out the top portion of the card, kept the bottom portion of the card, and at the end of their hunt, they filled in the bottom portion and dropped that in. Our managers would spend an immense amount of time going around collecting those and cards. They would have to hand enter them, or someone at Pratt entered them in. We would sometimes get the data information 6 months or later after the actual hunt event went on. So in 2014, we began the electronic check-in system, 13 properties. Almost all of them were these wetland areas that already had cards and a long history of hunter information going through that. Right now, we're at 27 wildlife areas and IWEHA tracks in several counties. As of yesterday, we had over 54,000 accounts. 66% of them were resident, 34% non-residents, and at that time, we've had 315,000 check-ins. When you check in, we require that they check back out, and we are at 99.1% compliance, completed information going through that. If someone doesn't check out at the end of the day, we continue to send them notifications, but we're getting complete hunt information on that.
So you know exactly who they are, right?
Yeah, we know who they are, yes. Yep. Go ahead. These are the properties that are currently in the electronic check-in system. There's 27 wildlife areas, and the IWEHA is a new one that our wildlife division runs. We had a difficult time, they had a difficult time getting walk-in hunting areas near urban areas. But it might allow one group of 3 hunters, one group of 5 hunters, or just a single hunter for a day. And they can check in. As soon as they hit that occupancy limit, that area is closed. And we do the same thing for dove management at a couple of our areas, dove fields. Next. So that's the sign that we have posted around the properties for the daily hunt permit. You can see there's a QR code on it to get them in there. This is a web-based, it's not an app, although we do hope, and we've been hoping for quite a while to get that in an app. It's a separate data system than our licensing system, but again, our plans are that we link it right into our hunter licensing system. So when you have a KWPT number, you will have an electronic check-in number. Next.
I have a question. Is that phone number manned all the time?
Yes, it is.
So if they don't have a smartphone or anything like that, they can call at any time?
Correct. Yes.
You want us to ask questions during or after the presentation? Is there any consequences or penalties, or what are we trying to?
We are trying to gather the information. We have never written, to my knowledge, a citation for someone that hasn't checked out. We continually send the reminders and reminders and reminders. We still have people from 2014, 2015 that they get tired of it finally, I guess, and they say, quit sending me these things. Our interest is in the data.
Okay.
Mike, can they check back in if they have?
Yes. This is the look of the web page. It is a web-based situation. So the public, for use, they've got to go into the web. And Commissioner Sill, you were asking about telephones. To set up an account, you must use the website. You have to have a PC or a smartphone in order to do that. But to do that daily check-in or check-out, you can use your smartphone, you can use a computer, or you can use the telephone. We allow check-ins. I'm sorry, Commissioner Sill.
No, that's okay. So what is the penalty? You're out hunting, you decide, hey, let's go check out that area. Your phone's dead, you don't have it with you. You can't.
Our requirement is that they check in before they go hunting.
So they cannot use those public areas if they don't have a phone? If they don't have a smartphone or didn't do it in advance?
Correct, but we also have our managers, our department people are fantastic about getting them set up with accounts if they show up and don't have that stuff.
Okay, thank you.
So is reception an issue?
Yeah, I'll get to that here in just a little bit. So you can check in as early as 8 o'clock the night before you plan to hunt. That allows them to check in from home. That allows them to check in anywhere along the way where they do have reception. They can do it from the motel, things like that. So they can check in early. Our checkout system is midnight the night of the hunt. A lot of our hunters end up not checking out until they check in the following day. But it does say on when you check in that you must check out by midnight the night of the hunt. So our check-in process, and I'm going to go through this when I finish up the slides, but you log in, once you have an account, you log into your account. If you're checking in the night before, it asks you, are you hunting yet today or are you hunting tomorrow? Because we do have some people out there later that might be hunting fur bearers or something like that. It asks you what location, what property you are hunting. It asks you the activity, and they only see activities that are currently open. Currently, you're going to see small game hunting is the only open season right now. So that opens and closes. When waterfowl season opens, then they have the option to click waterfowl. And then you're asked to confirm. That's the simple process to check in. It takes seconds. The check out process, you log in, it asks you for a specific location. So you're already hunting Cheyenne Bottoms, it's going to show you a list of all of the pools at Cheyenne Bottoms, and you select which pool, and that's what gives our managers the information specific to a management pool or an area. Some of our properties only have just, if you're deer hunting, it just really says Glen Elder General Wildlife Area, because it could have been no specific area, but none of the specific pools, just generally hunting the whole property. It asks if you harvested any game, yes or no, and then you go through and enter the species and the number of those species that you harvested. For deer and turkey, buckered or antlerless. We ask for turkey, we ask for the beard length, we ask for a bearded hen, a jake, or a tom. And then they confirm that again, and they're completed with checkout. Just to show you some of each year's accounts that we've had and what they use to create their accounts. You could create the account again through a PC or through a smartphone. You can see when it started, people were using both the smartphone and their computers. Here in the last year, you can see that the smartphone, so people are getting reception, people are able to use their smartphones to check in and out, or to set up their accounts. So if they get to one of our properties and they see the sign, they are, in most cases, able to get an account and then get checked in. All of these graphs are showing for the year, and the year starts June 1 through May 31st. That's the hunting season we're looking at. Is it goes all the way through the spring turkey season. Just showing you the accounts we have by each of the years since we've been through May 31st of 2021. So you can see we had a big spike in the second year, and then percentage-wise have stayed pretty well the same in past years. So remember that once you have an account, that's your account forever. So these would all be new accounts every year going through that, up to the 54,000 some total accounts that we have in the database.
So if there's a non-active account, if somebody signed up in 2015 and has not used their account since, they're still in the 55 percentile.
That's correct. I'm sorry, for that year. For that year. That's the year. Right.
This shows every year.
If I did not use my account in 2020, I'm not part of the 55%.
Not for 2020.
Okay.
Right. You were back in the year 2015.
But you're part of the 54,000.
Right. Once you have an account, you keep that account, you can use it. If you don't remember your information, ask any of the guys sitting in front of you. They get phone calls all the time for hunters saying, what's my account information? Our folks at Pratt get that, and I get those things too. Plus, on the website, there is a forgot password and a forgot username.
Yeah, I signed up at the bottoms in 15 or something like that, and then I went just recently, got back on, and yes, I had an account. No, I didn't remember my password. Yes, you sent me a new password, and yes. But my point is I am not part of the 8,151 people.
No, that's totally new accounts for that year.
Is this for iSportsman total on all properties, or is this just iWeHaw?
This is total iSportsman accounts, yes.
So it would include iWeHaw accounts too.
Right.
The majority are public lands.
Presentation, I showed the slide that had the total number of non-residents. I can't remember what it was right now, but of all of the accounts. Just to show you, this is going back to the check-ins a minute. I just want to show you that you can check in with a telephone. That is available, but as you see, last year, that are using the telephone, the thing about the telephone is it is that enter one or a PC to do that. Just to, last slide, to compare the waterfowl check-ins to our annual list there as it goes through. Waterfowl hunting is 40 to 50% of all of our check-ins. And remember, these are daily themselves. We're just saying of all of the users each year, we had about this many were residents, this many were total, and this many were waterfowl, things like that. So you see last year we did have a good spike in the total number of iSportsman check-ins.
Are the rest of these for upland?
Deer it depends on the property. Certainly, a popular Glen Elder is a popular upland area, so they have a lot of upland hunters. So does, and then, places like Lovewell have a lot of deer hunters. So we carry those. So it's all, everything from small game to dove hunting, to fur bearers, to deer hunters. And we keep track separately by archery deer hunters, muzzleloader deer hunters, and firearms deer hunters.
Okay, but half of these check-ins are waterfowl related.
That's correct.
And so everything else is the other 50. So
that's correct.
Fairly significant to me, I'd say.
Yes, it is.
I think these properties are just set up that way as well, though, I think, with iSportsman.
Yeah, Commissioner Ryder, we originally, when we were asking for this kind of data on the paper card system, it was predominantly our wetland areas. And so that when we started iSportsman, we started with those wetland properties. So, but a lot of them in the Northeast, most of them in the Northeast, our public properties require iSportsman check-in. So we're gathering a lot of non-traditional type game species. I mean, if it wasn't for this system, we wouldn't have a clue that squirrels were so popular pursuit animal in some of those Northeast properties. So.
Yeah. My question is along this lines. You said Glen Elder wildlife areas are part of iSportsman. Does that include the water, or is that just upland hunting?
No, it's for everything.
So if you hunt ducks east of the causeway on the water, it is iSportsman.
Yep, correct.
If you would, go to the Again, this is the website we have going through it. If you already have an account, you can go to the brown bar and click on the check-in out. Number, it's easier to enter the username in most cases, and then there's a PIN instead of having to remember your password. Jason has both of those entered in, so he clicks the login button. First thing it says, you want to check in, you click the check-in button. It shows you a list of all of our properties that are in the system. So go ahead and do Cheyenne Bottoms if you would. The only season that's open currently is small game. And again, if was deer season open, archery deer, that activity would show up. Waterfowl hunting, that would show up. So the only thing we can click right now is small game hunting. It reminds you that you must check.
Yeah, and then also, if there's whooping cranes present on a waterfowl property, it'll pop up then too that certain pools are closed or the entire property is closed. So it's a nice feature to have at the onset of checking in.
We can send text messages out to people that are on the property that day. We get information of next of kin or emergency contact. Things like that we can put out, as well as if someone calls us looking for their, people call and they've said, I need to get a hold of so-and-so. Okay, where are they? Well, they're hunting in Kansas. And through this, we are able to look that up instantaneously. And I forgot to mention that earlier. What we're talking about is data that is there at the tips of the managers right now, as soon as it's entered in there. And they can look at their information of harvest. They can look at who's out there on the properties. Our law enforcement officers can look at who's on a property, decide whether, looks like, let's go out to this property. It looks like it's busy. So once you're checked in,
I was hunting at Cheyenne Bottoms and there was a tornado coming. Would we have the potential to contact people who are out there and alert them about dangerous weather?
we certainly could, yes. Again, if they have the ability to receive a text message, we can send that right out. And our managers locally have the ability to send out those type of warnings.
Okay, terrific, thanks.
It doesn't have to go to me or anyone else. They can do those advisements on their own. So if you're checked in, you go back to the website, click that check in out button again. This is already logged in. It tells us that we were checked in 2 minutes ago. There's a red button that says check out. Click the check out button. Now it's going to ask you where specifically you hunted on that property. We were hunting small game at Cheyenne Bottoms. So we don't, Jason Wagner does not need to know what pool you were hunting for small game. If we were hunting waterfowl, it would have a whole list of information there, but for small game, we just want to know how many rabbits. Did you harvest any game? We haven't ever liked the wording of that, but we harvested some game, so we're going to go ahead and click that. Because we're hunting small game, it only shows us rabbit and squirrel. If we were hunting deer, it would have a list of deer. If we were hunting waterfowl, it would list ducks and geese, a bunch of species that we are collecting information from. So if we click the rabbit, how many did you get? We got 3. We said, okay. Do you have any squirrels? No. Did you harvest anything else? That light green button. Click on that, and that shows you a list of all of the other species we have in the system. So maybe we were hunting rabbits and we also shot a beaver. We could click and enter that going through there. A lot of our waterfowl hunters, our upland hunters may shoot another species, so they can still enter that. Once you're done with that, the blue button says, I don't have any more harvest. You click that, and you confirm that, and you're completed. That's the process that the public sees. In the back door, our managers can look at who's out there, how many hunters are out there, what the harvest is. They can look at information by the day, by the week, by the month, by the year, in total. Just a dynamic thing. And Jacob, I don't know, Travis or Monty or Jacob, I don't know if you guys were going to mention. One of the things that those guys actually do is they look at the harvest going on in some of their pools. And if they see harvest declining, they can actually go to that pool, add some more water, freshen things up, and they see the bump right back. See a bump right back up in harvest. So there is some practical, timely stuff that this thing's for. Tom Bedrowski uses it. Our species coordinators use the information, our managers use the information, so it's a valuable resource that our managers are actually out in the field creating habitat, not driving 100 miles around, picking up cards, sorting through cards, entering the data. It's a lifesaver. This came from Fort Ross. Other states now either getting it or are moving forward in looking at this exact same type of thing.
Mike, or Stuart, for perspective, how many wildlife areas do we have and how many of them are in the high sportsman? I mean, not all of them are, right?
Right. We're 27, is that where we're at?
Yep.
Total properties, yes.
And how many is that? How many total of wildlife areas?
Oh. Discuss is possibly implementing this more on a statewide level, because it is valuable information that managers use day in and day out, so.
Is there a how-to video like this on our website? This would be fantastic for
There is no video.
people to get on there and click and see how you go through this system.
I will say our staff at Pratt headquarters and all of our regional and district offices are really good about walking newcomers through this system. You know, they call in and they'll actually set up accounts for them or walk them through the system, you know, on the phone. So yeah, we don't have a how-to video anywhere, but our staff statewide is really good about getting people signed up.
I was saying something just like this right here.
That's a great idea. And they could do that.
And there's a lot of people that are intimidated, you know, like you're talking about getting the assignment. Well, I'm in the same. But if you make it simple like this, you know, happy. Yeah.
And I think that's something that we need to discuss as we
Is this will be a part of your app, your Hunt Fish app. So instead of doing this, you can go in straight from your app on your phone and check in and check out through that. So.
Oh, good.
Any other questions for Mike?
If you're archery deer hunting and that's your intent, you still got your turkey tag, fall turkey tag in your pocket, but you only checked archery deer when you're checking in, but that turkey happens to come by and you're able to harvest that. Is there a way then to go back in and say, I was deer hunting, but I took this? Can you go back and add that?
You cannot.
Is that a problem?
Our intent is that you enter in the primary purpose for your visit. When you enter your harvest, you can still enter your turkey. You might have been archery deer hunting,
okay,
but you can report that turkey, and in the data that would show up that an archery deer hunter harvested a turkey.
Okay.
So we can, for our information, we can do that, but yeah, the sports person cannot.
We're at an advantage too, because we've had the opportunity over the last 6 to 7 years to figure out all the bugs in the system that maybe we need to look at changing as we progress to a new licensing system. So I think I'm hopeful that we can make some positive improvements as we move forward. And to be quite honest with you, my goal, you know, pie in the sky dream would be like if you go to a restaurant here in town, rate your visit to the restaurant. You know, it'd be nice to have that kind of technology capabilities at our properties, to where when you enter the property, you get a notification that checks you in. When you leave, you get a notification. But that'd be really user friendly anyway.
Is there not a way when a person buys their hunting license that it automatically establishes their account at that point?
Well, that's with the new licensing system, it should all mesh. I mean, we're kind of hoping that once you have a KWPT account number, your KWPT number is your high sportsman ID, and you won't be sent to a new link to check in. It'll all be all encompassing system. So.
Because I know that having to have a smartphone or a PC to establish that account, if you're already out there in the field and have made a decision on the fly to go someplace and you don't have an account.
Well, like Mike
If
said.
it's already established when you got your license, then that's not an issue.
Yeah, then that's what we're looking at doing. So it's all one-stop shopping basically is what we're hopeful for. So, and one comment I might make too in relation to that too, we're all about education. And like Mike said, if somebody shows up and they have poor signal at the time or they forgot their phone or whatever, we want people to be out there hunting and have a good time. We're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. We write tickets when we think we have a habitual violator that just refuses to check in. But if somebody's there, honestly, made a mistake, we're going to try to educate them and if we can set up an account right there out in the field for them, we will. We're not out there to be the bad guys. We want this data is invaluable to us, so we're going to do everything we can to make sure people are signed up.
Mike, you said you would address connectivity on one of Emmerich's questions.
Oh, yeah.
There's a problem with signal.
Right, and I guess that's what I tried to say is they have, somewhere along their trip to coming to the area, whether it's, and that's why we established at 8 o'clock the night before. They can check in from home, they can check in from the motel, they can check in on the road to that property. Cheyenne Bottoms has poor connection down in a lot of the pools. Yeah. But as they're coming into Cheyenne Bottoms, we have that. Our hope and goal, as Stuart said, is by linking it to our license system, it's an app. And then we've done away with a lot of that connectivity issue that we also have. To get that account, it requires a little bit of, it requires that. But once we get into our system, once they have that account, KWPT account, there's a button right there that says check in, and you'll follow this similar pattern to do that. And I guess that's what I've seen over the years is we have less and less connectivity issues. When we started, we had older hunters. Our folks are setting up accounts for them. Almost in every case, the older hunters that struggle with technology have had someone younger or someone tech savvy to be able to get in with them going through that. And Stuart just addressed it perfectly. If our managers see someone out there that didn't know, couldn't get in there, we're setting up accounts for these folks all the time and saying, okay, you've got your account now, let's get you checked in and show you.
Right, good.
Thanks, Mike. We probably better keep moving right along.
How many?
Go ahead.
I didn't see is there a comment section in iSportsman where you can make a comment or rate your hunt?
There is not. When we set this up, our idea was to get the hunter use, the days of hunter use and the harvest, and keep it as simple as that. What we have in the system is we can go back in, we can pull out hunters from this property, that property. We have their email and their contact information. We could do a follow-up survey if we wanted to. In my experience over the years with the agency, we've done numerous satisfaction surveys on our public lands. And for the most part, for overall, it comes back and says average. And we have people that shoot 0 game and rate it excellent, and we have people that limit and they rate it poor or fair. So we see the whole gamut, but currently we do not ask them that when they check in or out. We can follow up and be able to do that.
Stuart, how many presenters do we have this morning?
Well, basically, they're all here to answer any questions.
Okay, so I'm just trying to get a gauge time because I know there's going to be a series of questions to modify pressure and some other things. And so I didn't want to.
Right. We've got 5 properties basically that we're going to cover this morning.
All right. I didn't want to run out of time.
Yeah.
One other thing about iSportsman. One of the things that has been repeated to me by
And it goes back to the same thing with the cards too, but you have people that, is there a consistent problem? And maybe it's a perception, but with people coming onto our properties and not checking in and leaving and that kind of stuff. I mean, this is all good as long as somebody checks in.
Right.
But
You're asking about compliance.
yeah, and I think there's a perception out there, at least from what I've received, that
Go ahead.
not all people are.
Commissioner Ryder, from my personal experience being on the wildlife area since 2014, there may be 3 days a duck season that I'm not on the wildlife area. I can pull that up on my phone instantaneously. I would say I check iSportsman on my phone at Neosho Wildlife Area. Now I will say, everybody says the non-residents are not signing in. From iSportsmen are not compliant. We've got some stubborn people locally that refuse to use it, and we've gotten their attention with warnings, written warnings, and they've been compliant. So to answer your question, I have caught people lying on their cards about harvest. I've caught people lying about where they hunted. I've caught people seeing the next day, hey, you didn't check in yesterday. Oh, well, I didn't, it just dumbfounds them. I'm very good at recognizing vehicles. You know, okay, there's 15 vehicles in the parking lot, but there's only 20 people checked in. Who's not checked in? What iSportsman does is I can click on accounts. I can see where those people are from and potentially even what vehicles they're driving. And I can, okay, there's 2 trucks from Florida, but there's nobody checked in from Florida. Now I can go out in the marsh or wait for them to come out and address the issue. So like I said, maybe 2% non-compliance, and 3,500 check-ins, 2% is not very much. I realize it's not perfect, but it's better than nothing, and it is a very useful tool.
Is that response consistent with what the rest of the managers would have? Do you have high compliance ratios?
At Cheyenne Bottoms, we've done compliance surveys on opening day of teal season and regular duck season. When I see it's quite a bit less compliance than that. It's about, I'd say, 70 to 75% compliance based on the surveys we've done there.
I'd rank the person about that same 75 to 80%.
But you have to keep in mind too that those properties haven't been on iSportsman as long as Neosho has too. So it's a gradual educational process too. And overall,
I heard several times, and I would, and I knew Travis. I talked to Travis before about, and he's, in the parking lots and looking at those kind of things. So I just wanted to kind of see what everybody thought about it. You're always going to have, you're not going to have 100% compliance in anything you do, basically, but as long as we're working to improve, I think that's.
May I add that at Neosho Wildlife Area, essentially we've got some satellite pools, but essentially there's one way in and one way out. Cards have been strictly enforced since 1986, and prior to that, the area opened in 1962 and they had a manned check station. So having to check in and check out is nothing new. We've got data. We discovered handwritten data from the early 60s through this. So,
have you noticed those who don't comply? Is there a theme or a trend of why they don't? So we could learn to address that with their responses they've given you.
A lot of them say they forgot their password or this thing doesn't work. I'm putting in my username and it's your system's messed up. Well, I can get on my phone and look up their account information, and 99% of the time they are putting in the wrong information. I hope that we can go to, when you have a username, it's your KWPT number, not Duck Slayer number 1, 1978, kill them all. Uppercase, lowercase, and.
Was that Mike's password?
Did you look at Mike's account?
So yeah, that is, I just forgot. Well, when you hand them a piece of paper with warning and tell them that the next time there's no warning, they tend to have a better memory. And something that didn't get mentioned on iSportsman is, so I say, I come check you and you're not signed in. We make sure you have your own account. You can get signed in. I can put notes in there so that, all right, I know Commissioner Cross, he has been warned at Neosho. Well, you go out to Cheyenne Bottoms and they don't know who you are, that you've been known or been warned. There is a note in there that says Commissioner Cross has been warned about non-iSportsman compliance. His system, his account works so that the information can be spread.
They can cross-check out.
Yeah, yeah.
Good.
How does monitoring this and the checking compliance play into some of the concerns about the inappropriate or unlawful guiding on the public lands? If your compliance is that high, then you ought to be able to see the names that are showing up in groups every day, which may mean that some of the perceptions about guiding might be incorrect. So can you guys address that issue for us?
I'll say that the names of guides and outfitters do not show up in iSportsman at Cheyenne Bottoms.
Are they hunting?
I don't know if they're technically hunting, but we'll address this in a little bit. But guiding is pretty minimal right now. But the ones that I know that are on the property, they usually, if I see their truck parked there, they're usually not signed into iSportsman that day.
But they're supposed to be.
Correct.
Are they not carrying a gun?
I mean, I'm not on the march to
observer.
I don't know how to answer. I mean, I assume they're out there actively doing something. I don't know if they're actually guiding or hunting, or they may be hunting on their days off as well. That's always a possibility too.
But it's your opinion that those known guides that you're aware of are, for whatever reason, not compliant with iSportsman.
Yeah.
Probably for the reason you're pointing out of being repetitive.
I will say too, Mr. Chairman, that we've done some follow-up conversations and research with the local county attorney there in Barton County, and actually Regional Supervisor Manuel Torres took them on a tour, and they're very supportive of iSportsman compliance and illegal guiding and some of the things that we're proposing this evening and changing regulation there at the bottom. So it's been a long process, but we're getting where we want to be when it comes to compliance, but there's still things we have to investigate and look at.
It's difficult, and you and I can look at somebody, and a wildlife manager can look at somebody and they'll say he's guiding that group of dummies. But if they've been sufficiently coached, he's right. Going to marry my sister. And it's hard to document a case because that guide's cagey. Half of his friends have been, arrested before. So he knows the routine. And I think that is a target that we want to go after. And I think we'll get back to that this morning. One of the things that I think that this group really wants to focus in on is there is a perception of overcrowding, and the perception is it's overcrowding by non-residents. Well, it may be true. Modifying that is going to be difficult. And if you don't have more presentation, I'm going to ask that some of these questions be brought up and let your people answer them. And there is no right answer. It's hard, but I guess I'll start with the question is, do you feel like non-residents have overburdened your facility?
Jacob, let's start with you, Mayor Dezine.
To answer that question, or?
Yeah. And that, Commissioner, that was one of the main questions I asked on our Zoom was, do you have a non-resident overpressure issue? Or what other main problems do you have on your property? So Jacob, if you'd start, please.
We're just going to run through these from the top.
Just answer the chairman's question first off.
So, I'm Jacob Coulter from Mayor Dezine Wildlife Area. I do not feel like I have a non-resident overcrowding issue. Mayor Dezine is a little unique in that it's only 4 miles from Missouri. So if you were to run some iSportsman numbers and just split it strictly resident versus non-resident, we have a pile of residents, pile of non-residents, but of those, over the last 5 or 6 years, 50 to 60% of those come from Missouri, and I'm going to call them day trippers from Missouri. They're socially, economically, work in the communities, live in the communities. They're basically local for all intents and purposes. So, oftentimes we'll say not all non-residents are created equal. I have a lot of non-residents that live within 15 miles of my wildlife area. They just happen to live on the other side of Missouri, but they might work in Kansas or live in Kansas. So it's a little tough to sort out. In general, I'd say no.
Okay.
And the data that you guys have in this packet too is the same that I presented at the last commission meeting, kind of reflective of what these guys are talking about. So let's move on to Monty and Travis and Neosha, where actually this season did actually indicate a rise in numbers to where percent of non-resident use actually surpassed resident use by a little bit.
So that is true. Going up about 10% annually. We started out where we were averaging about 18 to 22%, and now we're at 49, 50%. So over the last 3 years have increased 10% every year. But I also want to add that we've also decreased in our number of our resident hunters by 20% since 2012, and that's alarming to me as to why that happened. So anyway, don't know what the answer is, but the perception there is that we're overcrowded, which our hunter numbers don't dictate that we're overcrowded. But the non-resident hunting culture is different than the resident hunting culture. And with that being said, they're in the marsh 10, 12 hours a day, 16 hours a day sometimes. And where the residents, they'll come and they'll hunt for 4 hours and they go home. So the perception is like 06 to 2011.
Is there a point where the numbers get so skewed that you feel like you need to make some changes?
I would say at the levels that they're at, I'm concerned with the resident numbers more than the non-resident, but I really haven't put my finger on the pulse of why we're losing our resident hunters. Is it because of the increase of the non-resident hunters, or is it because of some other factor? But if we go up another 10% this year, then I'm going to be concerned.
And Monty, you are recommending some changes in the coming year, right?
Right. The changes that we made were not due to non-resident usage. It was based upon a resource issue. And because we're primarily as a resting and feeding area first on the wildlife area and then hunting secondary. So we felt like that with the new non-resident culture, they get in the marsh earlier, they stay later. And we weren't seeing the bird use that we had typically seen in historically. So that was the reasoning behind no.
The non-resident culture as compared to the resident culture. If I'm hunting with Commissioner Sill and we live, in the same, she lives, down the road 10 miles, I'm probably not going to be, I'm going to be pretty courteous to her and her hunting. And maybe, somebody else that's not going to ever see me again or something like that might not be. Do you see any problems with non-residents not knowing the area and so they're crowding in on maybe residents that do know the area? Are you seeing non-residents and this maybe?
Travis and I both have hunt the area quite often and have from out of state. And we've also hunted within those distances of resident hunters. And if you have the right people there, then it's not an issue. Everybody, if you're patient, then everyone gets their birds. Now, there are days when it doesn't matter whether you're resident or non-resident, so you have good hunters, you have bad hunters, doesn't matter where you're from. So,
is there a substantial difference in equipment, motorized boat use, size of decoy spreads? Is there a major difference in equipment or hunting techniques between the residents and non-residents?
Not really. I mean, most everybody now, I would guess 75 to 80% of people are using a boat. Doesn't matter where you're from. And it just varies. Residents, some use big spreads, some use small spreads. It's a wash on resident versus non. So everybody has, the same equipment, or a lot of people do. Now, the one thing that, and I don't know if I already said this, but it feels like that we have more pressure with less hunters. And I think that's the perception, is people pull into the parking lot and they look around and it's like, well, there's 25 trucks here, and then they drive through and they see they're all non-residents. Well, I'm not basing my day upon a tag, that's sitting in my parking lot. I'm basing it on the total number of vehicles. It doesn't matter whether they're all from Neosho County. If there's 25, 30 vehicles there, I'm not going. So, and that's what we've tried to portray to a lot of the people that have had issues. It's like, well, don't look where they're from, just decide based upon where people are at in this particular pool or whatever as to whether you're going to go hunting or not hunting. So.
How long have you guys been at the OSHA?
Since 2006.
Rate the hunting, the quality of the hunt in 2006 versus 2020. Do you think the quality of the hunting in your area has declined?
No. Both of us hunt the area a lot, and as far as hunting the area, last year was the best year I've ever had. We witnessed it. We kept telling each other, man, went in early this morning and we didn't hear any ducks, didn't kick any out, which I can look at.
Is all of our boat, everybody's talking about boat races and this and that. Well, all of our boat lanes are no lake anyway, and if we have to have a little bit more coverage to make people understand that we're going to enforce that, you know, that you're not going to launch your boat and rip out of there.
What about some of the other areas?
Yeah, so to your point, Mr. Chair, I'm glad you guys brought up the broader perspective on how we manage the birds, you know, allow them time to rest and feed and be healthy for the benefit of the birds, first off, hunters, at the birds, the big picture. When it gets to you, Jason Wagner, and you mentioned this to me about the bottom, so don't forget to reference that when it comes to you too. Great conversation. Thank you.
As far as things go.
Okay, thanks, Jason. Coming and listening to our presentations today. If you'll turn to your packet, you'll see that our Jamestown resident versus non-resident waterfowl hunters from 2014 to 20, yeah, we are seeing a slight increase in total numbers. And like I talked amongst ourselves, because of COVID and those, we won't even get into those issues, but we have not seen a significant percentage change in resident versus non-resident. We were one of the first ones that did, up until about 97, we were just opening day surveys only, so that's the only thing I can go back and look at. But we were starting with the card system and went on to iSportsman. But we don't feel that we have. Our increase in numbers is because we have more areas to hunt, and we have done our renovations, and so our habitat's gotten better. So, it's natural increase that we, brought our numbers up. And I've just got an anecdotal from back in 1972. We had 1,200 acres of wetland. We had 120 hunters on opening. So I didn't see any notes in the files from any letters of complaint that I. Away for a long time. We really haven't seen that there. And we're kind of a long ways from a lot of residents because we're clear up on, Nebraska, almost Nebraska. So we did an extensive study on demographics on where people came from, and we had, 56 counties, usually 100 different counties in Kansas, usually 100 area every year, and 28 non-resident states, and a couple of foreign countries thrown in every year. So it's kind of been staying on the even keel. So we don't feel we have an issue there, and we strive to develop places for boats and non-motorized boats and walk-in areas to try to present places for people to go. We've got a youth things off, and I gotta, kind of give credit to our former supervisors and current supervisors and administration on allowing us to do some of those things for us. So just because we do make a point to, when Matt and I work at the weekend, we're there till almost the last person leaves, and we've seen people mostly we're done by noon. There's a few stragglers out there that people are in and out, even our non-residents. So there's a few folks that come in, and stay till noonish or later, but we're just not seeing the stuff that these other guys are seeing. So
I do agree with Travis and Marty. I've been there 13 years and have seen that cultural shift as far as pressure goes. Especially this year, people hunting longer. But with that, like Rob alluded to, we have a lot of access and a diverse area, and these people are able to spread out. I have not been hearing the complaints and the issues that some of the other properties are having, like Cheyenne Bottoms, with some of the motorized boat issues. We don't have any of that. You get to people being angry at each other or upset. We just haven't seen that.
No motorized boats whatsoever in your area?
no, we have both.
Yeah, we have our two main pools. We allow any type of boats, motorized or non-motorized. We have Marsh Creek area, which is basically an in-marsh creek that have off-pool storage. That area is electric motors or paddling only. And then we also have designated pools that are walk-in or paddling only.
But no gas engines.
Just on that one. Gas motor.
Gas motor.
Yes, and those are bigger, larger pools. One has a refuge on it. To 400 acres of walking with paddling access.
We've got a good discussion going on, so unless the commission wants to take a break, I'm going to suggest that if individuals need to take a break, they can go ahead and we can continue to go on to try to be as efficient with our time, because when you take a 5-minute break, it's 10. Can we have the next?
Just one thing, real quick. What do you guys had a record harvest this past year. What do you attribute to that? Great management?
Knocker, a PR grant, we're in the middle of a pilot joint venture grant, so we're always moving some dirt. We really improve using our ag funds when we can. We're always improving habitat, just like everybody here at this table is. We just keep pushing and pushing, and this year was just like we alluded to before. It was just the perfect storm we had excellent habitat, excellent water, and with everybody having a free range of when they can hunt, it was just what everybody's used to. So.
Yeah, and Commissioner Ryder, I would point out, excellent management is at the heart of it too. You can tell the focus, the expertise, and the aggressiveness, right? We got funds because these folks went after it, and we're focused on that, but then they put it to good. But it takes excellent personnel management who support them to make all that work together.
Jason Wagner, let's talk about the bottoms.
Okay. So consider myself a lifelong resident of Cheyenne Bottoms. I grew up right next door to Cheyenne Bottoms, so I've hunted my entire life. But what I saw last year, and I kind of picked up a little bit on 2019, we did have the number of non-resident check-ins exceeded the number of resident check-ins last year for the first time ever. What I saw was an increase in pressure. And pressure is a little bit more than, in my opinion, a little bit more than just the straight number of hunters in the marsh. It's like Monty alluded to, it's the number of hunters in the marsh, how long they're spending in there, the number of shots fired, the number of boats in the pool, the number of vehicles driving down the road, or the number of time a duck is hail called to. I mean, there's a whole list of variables that adds to the pressure equation. And what I saw last year, I mean, by the end of the season, not only the ducks were almost 100% nocturnal at Cheyenne Bottoms. You rarely saw a bird in the pool, hunting pools during daylight hours. They're there, they've driven a long ways, they're going to stay there and they're going to hunt. So they're in the market. Scouting as well, so they get in the boat, they'll go ride around, they'll go try to find that grass is greener in the next pool type situation. So I see a lot more boating activity, I've talked to a lot of them on their wildlife areas, especially in the southern states. It seems like there's a lot of boating restrictions down there. So what's popular is they don't have the ability to run their boat full throttle or pleasure boat. And so they kind of use Cheyenne Bottoms, which is, some of our pools are 3,200 acres. They have that ability to run their boat full throttle, and they're going to do it. So that, we do get a lot of the building complaints. The other thing that's really popular with that I see is rallying birds, or what I assume is rallying birds on those slow days when there's not much flying. You'll see one guy a few minutes and to stir up the ducks, if there's any ducks left in there, and then they go sit back down and try to rally birds. So that's what I'm seeing with the kind of the pressure. And like I said, the pressure is more consistent throughout the day and throughout the week than I would say even a few years ago. So throughout the day, what I'm talking about is traditionally everybody comes hunts for a few hours in the morning, especially residents will come hunt for a few hours in the morning. Non-resident, they're staying there. People make a long weekend, so you'd have an increase in hunter numbers starting about Thursday afternoon, increase Friday, Saturday, and then drop off after Sunday morning, time everybody leave and go home. But what downtimes and that pressure on the resource, so the the resource is constantly getting hit throughout the day and throughout the week, and that's what I'm seeing. It's more of a culture thing. Are we overcrowded? Last year we had really good habitat. I mean, it was one of the best. It was the third best since 1997 of harvest. Even though we had high hunter numbers, the habitat was good. We still had birds utilizing the about crowding a lot, but some of the historical stuff that I found was like in the 70s. Right at dark, they're coming in at last light, and then they're leaving 30 minutes before legal shooting line. So they're still in there. The boat's coming through. It kind of has a trickle effect. If the boat comes through, the pools are big enough where the birds can move and escape a little bit of that pressure. What I'm afraid might happen is if we have 14 boat ramps, miles and miles of road access, etc. If we have a it might be a little bit more easier to manage because I could foresee, people trying to sneak in early or whatever, and we can't be everywhere all at once. So that's why I did not go for the launch time, and I want to see what Neosho, how it affects their, Monty and I talk at least once every couple of weeks, so I'll stay in the loop of Neosho, and that may be something that we need to pursue in the future, but on a closing pool 4A at 1 o'clock to motorized boats. That's going to help reduce some of the pressure. It's one of our bigger pools on the property. So it still has good access where people can walk in a little bit, but it's big enough where people aren't going to be able to walk across the pool. It's approximately 2,000 acres of wetland. So that's going to provide a place for birds to escape some of the pressure, at least at some point during the day. And at 1 o'clock, starting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, then roughly a third of the property will be closed to motorized boats. We have one pool that pool 3A. It's about a little over 700 acres. It's been posted notice closed to motorized boats, and we're going to hopefully tonight with the vote will solidify that it's being closed to motorized boats. So then a third of the property at 1 o'clock will be off to motorized boats. But we still need to maintain access to people. Not everybody has physical capabilities to walk out, row out and stuff. So we still need to maintain access. It's too much to where a lot of people can't hunt because we still want people to be able to hunt us. But we want them to do it safely because of the concerns with the noise.
Is that a practical means to reduce pressure?
Some of the other states, on some of the other wildlife areas, they have it's a refuge in time. Practices.
Rather than say, okay, no non-residents, but this all-day hunting, this is our way of reducing the pressure, and generally it benefits the locals to do it that way because it has less of a deleterious effect on them because they're kind of sunrise to 11 o'clock anyway. And it might be a way to create more rest and subtly remove some of the non-resident pressure without being restrictive and have lotteries and percentages.
The only thing I feel with the completely closed to hunting at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a lot of for as far as locals go, that's when they like to hunt. They'll show up after they get off work. So that's why we went with the closed to motorized boats. So that would reduce pressure, but still give ability.
And I'm not recommending doing it any differently, and I think maybe you'll accomplish the same thing. But I think restricting access a big gap between 11 and 3, I don't know. Yeah. But the rest of the commission can talk, ask questions.
Jason, I was just going to mention real quick when you're talking about motorized vessels. Here recently we've gotten some feedback from hunters at Cheyenne Bottoms and even locals that are kind of pushing to ban mud motor type vessels. And you might kind of hit on your thoughts in that regard too, Jason.
Yeah, so hunters, obviously an investment in a boat is not a cheap investment. We don't really want, at least I don't want to shut people down that spent $20,000, $30,000 on a boat and then deem them not useful. Levels of physical abilities is pretty key. I mean, we don't want to, at least I don't, as a manager, I don't want to say you can't hunt here because you can't walk or you can't row. Give them that boat that gives them that ability. And like I said, we're ready with Pool 3A. We've had it closed to motorized boats for years. And even all of our data has shown it's never been better than the third best pool there is. As far as birds per hunter average goes, so it's still received a lot of pressure. So maybe that just boat access is maybe not the key. But another thing we can do, and I try strict some boating access to in that pool, and it did result like I expected. It did. Around the boating issues to some extent by just manipulating the water levels, and that's not regulating, forced regulation, and that way and it helps with my management plan as well. So our pools are big, it takes a longer time to dry out. If I can leave a pool even a few inches shallower than normal, which would be 18 inches there, it gets me ahead for the spring, and I can get in there and control the cattails quicker in the spring.
So what is a mud motor? Is it like, I know what a go devil is, or?
There's two basic kinds. There's what's called a long tail, which is more your old school go devil, and then there's the degree bent shaft that gets them to go, and they're the ones that generally that I get the most complaints about because they need to go at a high rate of speed in order to maneuver in the shallow water.
If we implement the new no wake regulation, that could affect that as well. You know, a lot of the locals are comparing them to
A short shaft will idle, won't it?
Yeah, it will. It's the problem that happens with the short shaft or the surface shaft, you can get in there, but then you get into a spot and then you're kind of strained and you're stuck. You can't get back. Completely jump dikes into other pools. We had some boats that were going so fast last year, they ran up at least 15 yards up onto our completely dry land where we normally flooded out by people going so fast in boats in icy conditions, going down an ice channel that breaking the ice through. I mean, so the boating, they're going fast, and the boating issues is a concern, especially with cattails and stuff. They're when they get up to speed, they're going and they don't slow down. And I'm afraid that at one point there's going to be somebody on the other side of those cattails, and it's not going to end well.
Do you have adequate law enforcement support for situations like that? And to support what you're doing management-wise, or is that a contributing factor?
At Cheyenne Bottoms, we have one game warden, and he covers 2 counties. I am not law enforcement right now.
whether it be public lands enforcement or law enforcement division. Typically at the bottoms, at certain times of the season, it does get adequately covered. But that's something that Colonel Kaiser and I continue to talk about is in order to implement these new regulations and have them be successful, we're going to have to put in some extra time, bring in some extra manpower. On the bottoms, but other properties as well too. So we're willing to take on that extra duty.
How big an issue is guiding on public lands? I realize that's a subjective opinion.
At Cheyenne Bottoms, the amount of pressure from the guides is pretty minimal on the property itself. But it is still occurring, and especially when I see it as more like the teal season and then the early duck season before the field hunting gets popular on the surrounding private lands.
No real issues.
It's hard to prove. I think most of the commissioners who get letters that have an anecdotal discussion about it, it tends to be the Cheyenne Bottoms area where our constituency believes that is a problem.
Like I said, I'm not denying that it's not happening. I mean, we're well aware that it is currently happening. We're keeping an eye at the local game warden and myself. We communicate almost daily during the waterfowl season, and so we are keeping close tabs on them. But I mean, like I said, maybe once or twice a week we'll see an outfitter's truck parked there. So I mean, it's not on a daily basis or a large number of.
He's just out bird watching.
Possibly. Like I said, when we know. gets hot with the geese and ducks.
That was one thing that the Barton County Attorney did express to me. So you're right, it takes a long amount of time to investigate, follow up, and so, you know, Colonel Kaiser and I have talked about that too. And are there things in the regulation or the continue, so.
Being short-handed, you're going to have some unsuccessful convictions, but I'll amend the charge. You may accomplish the same thing by creating a deterrence. And to have sound convictions, you need somebody there all the time taking notes with pictures. You don't have time to do that. Citations and be prepared for no conviction. On to McPherson, and then we're going to have another series of questions and whatnot. You have one right now? Okay. Go ahead.
The same issues, but the other areas also differ a little bit. McPherson Valley, that one certainly fits in that. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a problem at McPherson. What we have is pressure, unbelievable pressure from the first day of the season to the very end. But the pressure isn't coming from non-residents. Now the story gets even a little more twisted here because the next comment I'm going to make, and I've told most of the guys at this panel have heard me talk about it, I have a surprisingly happy group of constituents at McPherson for the crowded conditions. But if you look at the different opinions between the different constituent groups, you'll see how it comes to be. And I teased out the numbers for the September 2020 teal season just to give you an idea. The location of McPherson is in close proximity to Butler, Harvey, Reno, Saline, and Sedgwick counties. And in teal season alone last year, they made up 72.5% of the hunters. And when I talk to those, they're used to having to get there at midnight to get a spot. They're used to a group of people being 50 yards from them. And it's normal to them, and they have a great time. They enjoy it. Now, when you look at the other constituent group, my McPherson County, at 13.7% of the teal hunters at McPherson were from McPherson County. And when I talk to those guys, they tell me about the good old days, back before the it is a little easier for me as a manager to deal with a lot of happy hunters. You know, it makes my job easier. And I sometimes wonder if, you know, that's just way too crowded. But if the majority of my hunters are happy, do you change your management objectives to try to It makes for an interesting thing, but having happy hunters does make life a little better. I still get the complainers, and we always will. Another thing about McPherson, definitely different from the Osho and what Travis was talking about, number one bird in the bag at McPherson is blue-winged teal. It's been there 6 seasons. It's been that way every season. Well, you all know that hunting blue wings, this kind of conditions, crowded, everybody lining up on the dive, being close together. hours, you see the success rate drop off radically because you just can't put that kind of volume of hunters in really small wetlands. I mean, we have 55 wetlands on the property that total less than pool 2 at the bottom. So we're talking about small walk-in wetlands that just don't do all that well, don't produce all that well with the intense pressure later in the season. And so do I have a non-resident problem? To answer the original question, I do not. But I do have what is perceived by some as a pressure problem in general. And some of the same parallels with some of the guys being out there all day keeps the ducks from being able to utilize the food resources. Low numbers of non-residents. It'll be something for me to continue to monitor and see where we go in the future. And if any of they're happy now and start to get tired of the crowded conditions. The wildlife area is also relatively young compared to some of these other properties. Land acquisition began in 1989, so this whole culture has built of it being crowded. There wasn't that much of a stretch in there where it wasn't like this. So just a different property, experiencing some of the same pressure issues, just from a different constituency. Boat ramp on the property. Most of the access areas, designated parking lots, they're a decent little walk to the water. So if you were going to use a motorized vessel, you would have to take the motor. We've proposed to Stuart and to you guys this evening that if we're going to make changes on other properties, maybe the thing to do would be try to get ahead of any potential problems. And we've just proposed no motorized boats from. And it really is, you know, if you look at an aerial photograph of it, it's highly fragmented. There's nowhere to go there that's that far away. And by the time somebody could unload a boat and get it into the they could get with a motorized boat by the time they could get the boat ready to go. So this potential new regulation really seems to make sense for the property.
Okay. We have more non-resident hunters. Tags sort of stand out and they're weird looking, and so we see them and grit our teeth. The problem is we're trying to figure out against non-residents to solve that problem. You know, some of the things that have been just sort of casually proposed, legal counsel said I would advise against that. Preserve our resources for Kansas residents only. We have been sued and we did. And yet, I think the public perceives or feels like non-resident hunters are the problem. All of us commissioners have emails, and emails are kind of like a virus. They all tend to be kind of the same, and yet I think they are spontaneous, but you catch the email virus on a website and then notify your commissioners, and they all have a certain trend, and every are residents who feel like we have too many non-residents. And I think we probably do from a happy hunt standpoint in certain areas. But I don't know how to fix it. Commissioner Spore has had some suggestions.
I've finally figured this whole scenario out. And, you know, we started out complaining of too many non-residents, and that was our general complaint that we were getting in our emails, that there's too many non-residents out in the Ocho and too many at the bottoms. And you know, we haven't talked about Wilson. Yielded monstrous amounts of overpressuring of waterfowl. It just wasn't a very good season. And you guys of the group have shown us as commissioners that there have been more hunters in the past. There have been more hunters hunting all our areas. So it shouldn't be a problem today. Well, what I've become to realize was, you know, you get up at daylight, you go hunt, you hunt till 10, 10:30, you go home. You give the ducks a rest. It's just, that's how duck hunting is. That's how it's supposed to be. That's what I was taught. And that's not how our group of our hunters are hunting. And I am here to try to preserve the resident, the youth, and the quality of the hunt. And I appreciate you guys coming up with any monumental change, but it's just something that we've got to watch. We've got to keep track of. I don't have the answers. I don't. Get them till about 10, and whatever that lake gives me, that's what it gives me. I'm not going to fight it. So how much longer am I going to stay in there and continue this? And I'm going to quit picking on the non-resident. I'm not going to do it anymore.
Right, and I'll twist that a little bit. And if someone said, if there was a big red button right here that I can push and hit replay, for my personal season, I hunted off of Neosho Wildlife Area twice. And if I could push the replay button with the non-resident crowding perception that we have, I'd push it right now, because it was probably the best season I've ever had since I've been managing the property. But so there again, it's one person versus another person versus another person. So
this brings me to what I had mentioned earlier. Commissioner Spore, you mentioned there's a different culture of hunting now. And that's the reason I think before we do anything drastic, we maybe have to consider shutting off at 1 o'clock for a while, certain days of the week, to eliminate people who just come and camp.
Do you kill all your ducks after lunch?
No, but the crowding there may have been less hunters hanging around from sunrise to sunset. And I guess that's what I'm trying to figure out, how to maybe eliminate people in the field.
Yeah, there's a big push. Residents that watch the areas, to figure out that, birds move back into areas after lunch, PM. And,
I think there has been, we talked about that cultural shift. Technology has really changed over the years with the social media, the motorized boating, and people scout. They know how to scout. They scout they got their phone, they're scouting this way, they're driving, they got binoculars out, and they know when that pressure is relieved, those birds come back. So that's why we're getting that constant pressure. The people it's not just mom, dad and son go out to the same blind we always go to and hunt till 9 o'clock. That's what we do. And that's how I grew up. But that you guys are mobile and guys are visible, and they know, and they're going after these birds very aggressively. And that's across the board, residents and non-residents. So
at a previous meeting, Commissioner Sporer mentioned that we're sort of encouraging crowding by publishing the duck numbers. Do you think that is something that is more helpful than it is harmful? I mean, if you've got and I find those things interesting, to read forecasts. Ducks are a little more time sensitive. Would that make any difference if we amended how we handle that?
Well, if I may, I'll add my 2 cents worth here. I update my waterfowl report every Thursday afternoon, and the phone starts ringing about noon on Thursday, wanting to know when I'm going to get it updated. And it is without fail. If I don't get it updated, phone just rings constantly, and I suspect everybody down this table could say something similar. So we have turned in a way, although we do have good scouters out there, like Matt's talking about, a lot of them have turned into internet scouters, it seems like, for lack of a better term. They're going to scour the waterfowl report, see where the highest numbers are posted, and that could play a significant role in the location in which they choose to hunt. One note on the how to limit. I wanted to get this in before the next question came up. Though I'm not ready to implement these practices at McPherson, what I am thinking are refuges in time, whether it's half-day hunting, whether it's hunting on odd calendar dates only, whether it's hunting Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday. That, in a sense, would cut the pressure in half just because you're eliminating half the time. You also wouldn't be isolating any individual groups, whether they be residents from outside your area, whether they're non-residents from outside the state. It would put everybody on the same playing field and cut the access by half and give the birds a chance to rest. So just wanted to put my 2 cents worth in on that.
On the waterfowl reports, excuse me, I'll say that I think days starting about August 1st and run through the end of December, where literally I could sit there in the office and do nothing but answer phone calls. Like he's saying, if it's not updated by Thursday at noon, the phone really starts picking up, and they pass on pertinent information onto those waterfowl reports because people are so keyed into looking at them. When we have a whooping crane present on the property, the very first thing I do when I find out I update that report. So then people watch it all the time. They check it. So that relays pertinent information and pertinent regulations as well, stuff that I want to pass on to the general public, additional regulations on the property. To some extent, but I think the value of them is pretty critical for us, for me as a wetland manager, so I don't have to, like I said, so I don't have to answer the same exact question 100 times in a day. There are days where I can guarantee that the phone, if I didn't have that waterfowl report, the phone would ring 50 to 100 times.
I've experienced the same thing as Jason. I've talked to hunters and asked them about it, and they look at the numbers, yes, but we also get criticism as that we don't know how to count. That's opening up another bag of worms. You hear that a lot. But it's hard to count birds that aren't flying in flooded vegetation, and then they're hunting one spot. But the big picture is they're looking at the numbers as kind of an idea of when the birds are in Kansas. But a lot of my hunters that I talk to, they're looking more at water levels, ice conditions, habitat conditions, and maybe even your bird per hunter average when we include that on there. So there's just a huge resource form that on this one page, not just the numbers. So I think they're very valuable when it comes to that.
Just to follow up on that, I think we've gotten smarter as time's gone on with these waterfowl reports, and just like Matt's saying, I think we've gotten smarter where we report water levels, good habitat conditions, ice or the presence of or not, versus hard waterfowl, duck numbers, because everybody knows we can list in. So I think it's still a valuable tool, but putting more emphasis on habitat conditions and current overall conditions is maybe where we've gotten better at. That doesn't make hunters rely solely on that number where we get criticism for because we can't do math. They weren't there, so just a comment.
Well, and I agree. And I would sway more towards the maybe eliminating the total number of birds that are utilizing the area and just saying fair or good or whatever. But more emphasis on habitat conditions. And if you want to come hunt in Kansas or you want to come see what's there, then you're going to have to make the trip, and well, have you read the Waterfowl Report? Yeah, but what? Well, this conversation's over if you've read it, because we put on there and so it takes up our time when we should be working on something else, answering a question that they already know the answer to.
I've had it work both ways as well, where I'll have hunters come out and I'll see them in the parking lot and they'll say, man, I read your waterfowl report yesterday and you're reporting 3,000 ducks. I saw way more than that this morning. I've also had the other where they think that 3,000 means they're going to have 3,000 in their decoys before 8 o'clock. So maybe going to some sort of index where you're not given a spot on number, but a ranking could be a way to avoid people homing in on a particular area due to the reported number.
I think you guys are right on. I think it needs to be an automated system, and you guys don't need to be talking to hundreds of waterfowlers. It needs to be like the Bottoms used to have. They had that automated deal where you called that number.
We still have it.
You still have that?
I have that in the question as well.
And I think the habitat conditions needed, to be said, but I guess I still wonder if there shouldn't be some type of work to be done to go to an area. I guess and every manager's a little bit different. Matt counts different than he does, and Monty counts. I don't look at waterfowl counts. I just go hunting, and I always say, let's just go make a report. So I don't ever look at it, but post population. Why don't we have Jeff up there post the population of the pheasants and the quail in each walk-in area? That way, when you're from wherever you are, you don't have to go out and walk. You don't have to go look. You just pop up to the internet and say, yeah, over there south of Kobe, that's where it's at, because Jeff said that's where the pheasants were all at. How much easier do we got to make it? Is that what we really want? I think we just need to go to overall conditions. We don't post how many fish are in the lake, but we do post, what the conditions of the lake are, whether it has blue-green algae. Yeah. I guess, and it takes a little bit of pressure off you guys to have to every Tuesday go count 3,222 ducks. Norton's been posting 212 to 314 ducks. I'm just looking at that number, and people and we're talking about overcrowding. There's nobody here that hasn't agreed that we have an overcrowding problem. Maybe this is one small thing that we can do to maybe spread it out. Not say everybody's going to Cedar Bluff because there's Kent posted 30,000. And I've never said anything to Kent. I'm not going to tell him that he ought to be sandbagging counts. I'm not that kind of guy. You know, he gets done the best he can and probably does a pretty good job. But is that really needed in an effort to go hunting? Is that what we want?
I think I agree with Commissioner Sporer. I think it's a small movement towards eliminating the overcrowding problem, and I tend to not get really too excited about protecting the internet scouter, and so I think that's something we ought to consider. Just maybe give conditions for safety and ice and so on and so forth, and then not list the numbers.
Yeah, Chairman Robert, couple. You guys have made a bunch of good points. I've got a couple notes to respond. One, what we're focused on is hunter satisfaction. We're trying to figure out how you get there, and that's a complex set, as has been mentioned. You know, a lot of variables go into what makes for better satisfaction. We've had plenty of discussion saying, if I'm going to travel 2 or 3 hours, the better feel for the number of birds that are there, the more likely I'm to be satisfied. But that may be changing, and I appreciate the discussion about maybe there are better indicators for that. Yeah, so that's been a good conversation. We'll continue that because maybe we can do that better. There clearly are differences.
Secretary Lovelace?
Yeah.
Sorry, Warren had his hand up for a while.
Yeah, go ahead.
I missed him.
Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Capeller.
Thank you. It's been a little spotty, so if I cut out or just wave your hand and I'll quit because it's a little bit frustrating. But I've caught enough of it to get a sense of the conversation. First off, Commissioner Sporer's idea. I too kind of support thinking about that concept. But generally, one of the things I've gathered is you guys have really good data. You have the ability to understand the conditions day to day on the ground. It seems like the problems of pressure and overcrowding can vary from area to area and from day to day. So they're somewhat unique. So my feeling is at least our first line of attack seems to me to be to make sure that each of the managers has whatever tools necessary to them to be able to manage as best they can their particular area, including managing the crowding issue. And before we go to any kind of a general policy change, and I don't know what kind of tools I'm talking about, but if we sense there's beginning to be a pressure issue at a certain location, would the manager have the ability to, on the ground, without commission approval, change the hours of hunt or anything like that? I guess that's my thought.
A good thought. No, I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that question. How much flexibility do we have in terms of making changes outside of the commission approval process?
Well, Chris might be able to help on this, but historically, if it's short term, we can just utilize posted notice to enforce something. If it's going to be a long-standing area or regulation, then it has to go in the reference document. But if it's just a moment in time for a year or two or a season or two, I feel like we could just utilize posted notice. Okay. The other thing too is, on iSportsman properties, we can actually set occupancy rates too. So in a sense, you've got a refuge in time just by setting the total number of occupants on that specific property. And then you can go as far as as setting times or dates too. So iSportsman, again, ties into management of this problem too.
Okay. One of the things we've talked about a lot is the rhythms of a resident versus non-resident, very different. Commissioner Sporer pointed out, standard, when you live there, right, you got things to do. So you go out and you hunt for those hours in the morning, then you go back and do all the things that are on your list, as opposed to when you're there on vacation, basically. You can spend the whole day out there. But I think the ideas that have been brought up about refuge and time and in pressure, and ultimately good for the hunters, right? The more predictable that is, the better off we are. So I think that's been a great point of discussion, and we'll definitely continue that as a tool. We will address the reservoir. We aren't ignoring it. Commissioner Sporer brought up his experience on Cedar Bluff. We do have significant hunting opportunities on reservoirs, and we discussed bringing that up today, and Stuart said that really needs to be a subject for another day. On that, because we haven't really addressed that specifically in all this. The other thing I'd mentioned, we do have Tom Berdrowski here, and earlier it was mentioned about what can you do. I think we're all starting to get this broad perspective on, well, things are changing over time. We've got good numbers to see that. Tom keeps track of what's going on in other states and has kind of a historical perspective. And I heard, Tom, you mentioned, I don't know, a week or so ago, the evolution of these regulations in other states that have had a lot of non-resident pressure. Would you come up for a minute and maybe talk about that with the Commissioner, about your perception on other big waterfowl states?
So how states have tackled it has been a lot different. Some of them have been more long-term than others. Take South Dakota, for example, where non-resident hunting was prohibited from 1940s to the 1970s. And so they're, had a long history of that. So when they implemented their permit system for that, it was not new to their waterfowl hunters for it. So North Dakota, their restrictions originally came from pressure from being a rural area, from hunting pressure from the Twin Cities. So their initial response was to limit hunters, to limit those border jumpers like that. But as North Dakota became more of a waterfowl destination and more hunters became more mobile traveling there, now their bigger issues is hunters coming from nationwide. And then with the Canadian border closure, that really exacerbated the problems even more. Missouri and Arkansas, problems are more addressed to their state wildlife areas. Particularly Arkansas, their tradition of guiding is a long-standing and a very popular tradition. About 50% of their hunting is done through guide services on private land. So their problems on wildlife areas and how they're restricting non-resident use there came through those practices of what hunters thought were unrealistic hunting pressures.
Questions for Tom? I think that bears on us as we're saying, where do we need to head? What do we need to consider? It's helpful to know how other states have dealt with these issues.
Is there a difference? When I looked at Central Flyway, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska all have some regulations that look like on non-residents. Is there a difference between what the Central Flyway needs to do versus Arkansas, Missouri that are in Mississippi Flyway? Is there a difference that way that makes any difference in the regulations that we might consider?
So for the 10 Central Flyway states, North Dakota and South Dakota are the only ones that address hunter numbers or non-resident numbers through a licensing system, either through blocks, days that they hunt, or that Nebraska, Oklahoma, Texas, most of the western states do not have any kind of hunting restrictions on. As you go further east, hunting pressure increases. That's why there's differences between the number of hunting days we have in the Central Flyway versus the Mississippi Flyway for one reason. A lot of their issues are crowding. They're more populated areas, so a lot of their public lands have either draw hunts. I've spent time in working in some of the southeast states, and you apply for all your hunting you're going to do on public lands in April. A lot of them have some type of restrictions of either a time or place. Arkansas, on their federal refuges, they hunt every other day, have to be done hunting at noon and off the area by 1 o'clock. So each of Illinois is another state that is highly regulated on public lands where they either have daily draws or annual draws beginning of the year. Reelfield Lake is kind of one that's been in forefront lately, where they have draws on public land for some of their large reservoirs. So there are a lot of ways to address this issue, and the best way is usually locally.
Okay.
I have a question for Tom. You guys got nocturnal ducks at the Osho? You got nocturnal ducks? You got nocturnal ducks?
Almost 100% nocturnal.
How come ducks get nocturnal?
Pressure. I mean, when
what?
Pressure. Need disturbance, whether it's hunting pressure, whether it's other types of pressure. When I fly the statewide survey in January, places I see ducks is because they're not disturbed. Same thing when I look at satellite data of the birds that we have marked. Why are they on this little farm pond? They're not being disturbed. I mean, in order to rebuild their nutrient reserves, they have to feed, and they need not to be disturbed or predated while they're doing that.
And it's a phenomenon. Make sure there's a phenomenon there. I don't know how long I learned about nocturnal ducks, but a reservoir where they have a refuge or wherever the refuges are set up, there just becomes a point during the season that the ducks just don't fly. They will not leave their protected area until basically shooting hours are over. And how do you hunt a duck that's nocturnal, Tom?
Commissioners, I would, I guess I'm gonna tell an experience. This year in October, we had an incredible early push of ducks. Last year, our season didn't open till November 13th or 14th. Using the wetland pools. Wednesday before our youth season, you could pull into the parking lot before daylight. And I'm talking 3/4 mile away, you can drive in there with your headlights, and those ducks were nocturnal before they ever got shot at. So, yes, I agree it's pressure, but we can't control the pressure in Nebraska and North Dakota and South Dakota and Canada. So, yes, pressure is part of it, but these ducks had never been shot at on the Osho Wildlife Area. They've got more food than
this year, with the age ratio being skewed to adult birds, you have more educated, more knowledgeable birds. So hunting will be more difficult this year for that reason as well.
Years ago, Lloyd Fox showed me a study of gentle, curious deer in New York, how their gene pool went to shit pretty quick. And maybe a new genetic of more night-feeding ducks?
There's always been components. A good example that that both the Jasons had brought up earlier about teal hunting and how ducks respond. Those species of ducks respond differently. And then Monty spoke later that where his particular cohort of hunters prefer mallards, which are later season, so they're more educated birds. We're in the High Plains unit, some of those north central reservoirs. The mallards have a wintering ecology that's more of a goose than a duck. Larger flocks, field feeding, more prone to disturbance than some of those early season residents.
I was going to point out, so Travis relayed one story, I'll relay another story on nocturnal ducks. Pool 3A last year, like I said, it was a walking pool, but it had good habitat. Hardly seen a bird in there in daylight hours for weeks. The day after, during the split, the day it closed. So Sunday night it closed, Monday morning I drove through. First thing, Monday morning, hundreds of pintails just filled pool 3A. There hasn't been an uncrippled duck in that pool for weeks on end, and all of a sudden nobody drove through, nobody launched a boat, nobody yelled, and the pool filled up with ducks the next day. It's just like that. And animals, by the end of the season, they were had nocturnal tendencies where they were no longer feeding twice a day. Geese normally fly out in the morning, feed in the fields, come back, rest all day. I think is keying them to feed nocturnal as well.
And some of the weather patterns we attributed to that, the birds came in a big flush instead of trickle down. New birds arriving are more naive. They also weren't having the energetic costs of this more severe weather. We had very few long-term breaks where they had to feed more often or change their food resources.
Big, long, full moon cycles. Get them started.
Does a duck have night vision?
Most of their migration is through the night. Most of their feeding activity occur during dark hours.
Mr. Chairman, I just was going to mention, we talked about guiding and we discovered as we've had these discussions over the last couple of months that we know very little about what's going on with guides and outfitters in the state of Kansas because they're not regulated and they're not overseen in any way. And Brad and I have started a dialogue. We met with just a very few of them that we got to meet with here about a month ago. 2 of them came from the Great Bend area. They were local. They had a family there. They were they'd grown up there. They were very concerned about their reputation locally. I've recruited several more. We're going to have another meeting with the guides and outfitters in July. And it's just an attempt to start a dialogue and get to know more about them and what they're doing and hopefully maybe organize them in some way so that they can be a stakeholder and they can also be a point of information for us when we start looking at this. So right now they're operating, kind of under the radar. And so we make a lot of assumptions, but we really don't know what's going on out there. So we are really trying to make that attempt, and so far it looks like it might be something that we can continue.
I think that's a good idea. The couple points I'd make is number one, in Kansas, some of these guides need to hire a PR firm because they are looked at pretty negatively. And number two, at one point in time, we made a good faith effort to monitor and regulate guides, and they didn't like that idea either, so the legislature pulled it away from us. So yes, some of them want to do it, but they also kind of like that life in the shadowy conditions.
Right. But what we experienced was, like Mike mentioned, some folks that have been doing this. This is their vocation. They are engaged in the community. They operate above board. They donate hunts. They lease a lot of ground. But when somebody comes to them and says, "Hey, my granddaughter has never hunted deer," they find a good spot. So they are really engaged in a really positive way. There are others, though, like you pointed out, that aren't interested in that, and we're trying to figure out how to communicate, how to understand. And they, in a lot of ways, are similar to our managers that you've heard from. Their livelihood depends on this. And so they think all the time about how to do this better, how to regulate it better, how to make it sustainable. So we think we're hoping that these will bear fruit, give us better understanding. And if we aren't allowed, if the legislature says you can't regulate these folks, maybe we can get them to regulate themselves, right?
And that's a good point. Notwithstanding my dim view, I encourage you to go further and try to develop a dialogue. And if nothing else, maybe they should form their own association where they have to kind of police themselves.
Service. Where I'm seeing the rub is the non-resident run and gun guides that are coming into our state and just treating it differently than it should be treated.
We agree. Interesting, the last 2 I've recruited were folks that called in. One of them was had a big estate lease, and his hunters didn't draw, not as many of his hunters drew permits this last application, and he was concerned about that, but he would not admit to being a guide and outfitter. He was a club, and each of his members paid so much to come and hunt deer every year. And so they realized that there is People don't like guides and outfitters as a general rule, and so they don't want to be called a guide and outfitter. But after our conversation was over, he agreed, yeah, that's what he was doing. He was an outfitter, and he will be part of this next meeting that we have just so we can learn more about them and how they're operating and where they're operating. So
I got my wife confused. I always used to tell her I was going hunting with my buddies. She always thought I was screwing off and hunting. Now I've changed it to clients. I've got everybody confused now.
Okay, is there any other questions we have? Stuart, do you have more presentation?
Well, I came prepared with several questions that I had queried the staff with. And I guess if you feel like we've got some time, I've got one more topic.
Yes, and that's the reason it's 11:15. Let's go ahead and hit one more topic.
One of the main concerns that we were hearing from you all and the public too was, do we have problems with our youth military weekend hunts? So I asked that same question to the staff here, and so I'll start with Jacob again at Meredithine. And Jacob, how do you feel like your youth military season went? Do you have any issues there that need to be addressed?
I thought it went pretty good. You know, Meredithine had the proximity to some of the other military bases where we had higher use and stuff. Had some vets out, had some youth out. They were able to spread out, check some straps of some early mallards. Everybody seemed like they had a pretty good time. No issues to report.
You don't specifically have designated pools for youth only, do you?
Not at this time.
You just don't feel like pressure has warranted designating at this time?
That's correct.
Okay. Monty and Travis, what about Neosho?
We had like 60 hunters for the weekend, and we typically have about 30, so it doubled, but still for the acres that we had available, very minimal usage. It was about half and half. 30 were youth, 30 were military. We had zero issues. We do have one youth marsh, it's about 30 acres, but it was dry at the time. So we're not planning on doing anything differently than we've ever done until we would see a transition to where it's skewed one way or the other, you know. But, first and foremost, I would probably be catered to the youth more than I would the other, as far as designating something specific.
What? Quiet.
As far as Jamestown goes, our youth seasons traditionally have been very underutilized. We try to promote it as much as we can. And we also have the availability through our special hunts program. This last year we had 45 hunters. We had about the same number of youth, usually under 10 kids, but we had a lot. I pick up a lot of Fort Riley, Fort Leavenworth military veterans. Everybody seemed to have a good time. With that, in the coming years, we can, through the special hunt program, open up some refuge area just for youth only. And through some posted notice, we also can open up several wetland pools and designate them youth only. So I don't foresee there to be an issue there when we can separate these if need be.
I don't have anything more to add. I talked about it earlier in my presentation, as we do provide those areas for youth and mentors, and we need to do some more. We're our refuge has been open, has not been in effect usually during our youth season. So that's open. Also, it's been underutilized in the past seasons.
Last year at Steinbaum's with the combination of the youth and military, they kind of ran into a little bit of a shocker for a lot of the kids that have been hunting there locally. Normally we have less than 30 check-ins for the weekend, and last year we had 134. So it gained pretty significant amount. I'd say most of the good areas were covered last year, but so we'll circumvent that. We'll open allowed the last couple of years is some of our refuge area open to youth on a youth mentor program that way, and we do have one youth march. So I think we could avoid confrontation or overcrowding this year by allowing one of the
Traditionally, at McPherson, youth participation has been very low. With the addition of military last year, we did have an increase in the number of hunters on the property. Not necessarily do we have any conflicts, but we're proposing to make the Big Basin Marshes youth only for the upcoming season, just to prevent any future conflicts and to give the kids a place to go that's their own. And that still leaves 2 complete units for military veterans, et cetera, to go and hunt.
One thing I might mention too is in your packet of information, I included a page there that showed youth and military participation on these properties too. And I think one thing that's glaringly obvious to me and staff is, like these guys have said, those properties are underutilized by youth during those seasons, and we need to do a better job of promoting that. We have opportunities through special hunts, but we can do better in the future of getting more kids out, and that's where TANA and R3 folks come into play too, and helping us promote those and pass it on. Came up to on checking military, and we're going to do better this coming year too. I think we've gotten some clear direction on how to proceed in that manner too. So I look for this upcoming season to go smoothly and just improve our opportunities for our youth on these properties that these guys have identified as being underutilized. So
with that, I think Tana's here and can speak to that particular topic if the commission is interested in hearing what she has to say about the R3 viewpoint there.
Thank you for allowing me to be here, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. What we tend to see with youth participation where there's a decrease is if you go out to a school and ask a bunch of youth, hey, you guys want to go outside? Do you want to go on a hunt? A lot of times they'll be really excited about it. But one of the things we focus on in R3 is, does that youth necessarily have the means to go out and go hunting? They don't have that transportation, the financial freedom, etc. So a lot of our R3 programs right now are focusing on young adults, perhaps in the college age, that are starting their career, starting to make decisions about their life path, hoping to get them hooked into an activity and help them understand the importance of it so that if they do continue on to have a family, we're able to get those folks. So kind of increasing that social support. Because what we have seen when we have interviewed youth in the past or surveyed them is that they're not sure where to go and they don't have anyone to go with. Even if most of those folks, when asked, actually did, I think 80% of them had someone in their family or immediate friend group that hunted, yet they still had no one to go with. So a lot of the focus of our programs is looking into that and trying to bridge that gap or make those connections. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions as well.
Well, I've got a question. So you make a great point, Jana, about that next age segment that you are targeting. And I hear this from all the other states. It fits in exactly with what we've been saying. Have we ever considered, I mean, that rosy-cheeked youngster, I understand that's our image of when we're doing recruitment, retention, youth, right? That's who we focus on. Have we ever considered anything special, a special season, a special opportunity for that next age group?
As far as the history of that, I don't know that I can speak to it. I've only been on since 2018, so there might be someone else in the room that could better speak to that history. As far as that being considered in other states, not that I've heard. Conversation. While I do agree that guides and outfitters can sometimes have negative connotations, especially in Kansas, guides do play a really important role. The agency doesn't necessarily have the manpower and the resources to be able to provide mentorship opportunities, especially for adults. A lot of those efforts are focused on youth. So I'm really glad that we are trying to kind of better our communication and our relationships with those services, because that helps better that connection to R3 and kind of help expand some of our priorities as well.
So this year, we raised the youth age requirement from 15 to 17. So as a part of that, some of that mobile community, that 15, 17, where they're making some of those becoming adults, has been expanded. The veterans in active military, that's a young segment, active military, usually in their young 20s that are mobile and making choices like that. So we are contributing that way. If we graded season special like that, would also affect our total duck season days since we're limited by federal records.
Allowing our college students as well to hunt as residents, I think, is a factor in that too. And that's a really important one, making sure that they have access to those opportunities, whether they do stay and continue to live and work in the state or not.
Okay.
Questions for Tanner or Tom?
Yeah. So this talk today has kind of been focused on non-residents, and one of the things that Travis and I look at from our iSportsman data is, and that was alarming to us, was not only the non-resident usage potentially going up, but was the resident usage going down. And so do you know what the numbers are as far as, and I know that it's going to vary based upon, whether you hunt private land or public land. We can't tease that information out, but is our state duck stamp sales down for resident hunters?
Tom, could you speak to that?
No, they're actually up.
They're up.
Yes.
Okay,
Our
so
resident numbers are fairly stable, so we're not replacing, we're just adding additional percentage of non-residents.
okay, so that's one thing that's alarming in one of our slides that was provided, was the actual resident hunters. If you look back prior to 2012, we had very high resident usage, but now we have very poor resident usage, and that's alarming to me as to why they're not continuing to come out. And I don't have the answer for it, but if it's something that we need to be thinking about if other areas are noticing the same type of issues.
Is that something that's covered in your surveys? And do you send surveys out to people who bought a duck stamp before 2015 but haven't since? Because this question kind of applies to the deer, because the deer thing is happening the same way, right? That the residents have been dropping off steadily since 2014. And, the whys. And if you're not going back and surveying those folks specifically as to why, pressure, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But is that addressed in any of your surveys? And are you targeting any of those folks in surveys?
So normally do demographics each year of the waterfowl stamp sales, where our hunters come from, their age group communities. We all have a churn rate study with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and in the handout I gave you a few of those reports or numbers out of there. So we're looking at those type of things. Where hunters hunt locally is a lot harder to survey, whether private land or doing surveys on to get local samples. The sample size needed is very difficult to acquire.
I'm wondering about the hunters that aren't hunting, that aren't buying stamps.
Sure.
Are you surveying them?
Sure.
The ones that used to and aren't now.
Those are some of the churn rate studies that University of Nebraska has, where they look back at, went back 5 years and looked at how many times it came out, surveyed why you only bought it 1 year out of 5. But, the waterfowl hunters we have now are pretty ardent, and they're buying stamps mostly every year, like 80% out of.
So you made mention of the resident deer hunter trends, and I've mentioned the same thing. I looked at the last couple of years and felt like there was an apparent decline there. Levi's here. Levi, I think you corrected me the last time I said that. Not that we're going to get into a big deer discussion, but that's an important point, and I wanted with Levi here to address it. How would you characterize the resident hunter trends for deer? Hey, come on.
Warren's got his question.
Yeah, Warren, you want to ask your question first? Sorry, Mr. Chair, I should have let you ask him.
I can wait till after he answers.
Okay, thanks.
It had been declining. I'd have to look at my numbers specifically, but yes, since about 2014, we've been on a steady decline until this past season when we gained about 6,000 deer hunters of residents since the non-resident permits hold fairly steady through quotas.
Okay, thanks. Any question for Levi while we've got him up here? So, but we'll dig into that more, Commissioner Sill. That's a really important topic.
It's just if there's parallels, you know, even though the species is different, if there's parallels, then we ought to be paying attention to those. And that's my concern.
Amen. Amen.
Is that.
That's the nature of my question. And it has to do, I'm not real clear on the demographics. If we're losing resident hunters because we're losing old people at a faster rate than we're gaining young people or new hunters, that's one issue. We're losing hunters among all demographics and not adding hunters. That might be another issue. That might be more to do with the satisfaction of the hunt.
So, Mr. Chair, if I could respond, that's a great question, and we can provide those numbers for you all. So we'll put that on our list to get back and have a topic of discussion on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have one concluding remark to talk with where I know Commissioner Sill's coming from. The difference between non-residents and on waterfowl and non-residents on deer. Non-residents on waterfowl crowd a public resource, but they don't exclusively lease it and take it. And non-resident deer hunters have a more direct correlation to lost acreage of previously huntable land. Does that make sense?
Yeah, some.
Yeah. That's about my 2 cents worth. Well, and that's about worth 2 cents. At this point, it's 25 to 12. Our meeting starts at 1 o'clock. Make note of the change of time. And instead of 1:30, it's at 1 o'clock. We'll be right.
Sure.
In all of the emails, the phone calls that I have received and been a part of, not one of them has ever complained about area managers. They have complimented each and every one of you who are, some of you in really difficult situations. Some of you sound like you're in pretty good situations. Some have some major challenges. And I want you to know every single one of those ones that mentioned area managers was always positive. The hunters are appreciative. They recognize you're doing hard work. They don't always agree, but that's not the point. They're happy and they're appreciative, and you need to know that. So thank you.
All right, Commissioner Sill, I appreciate those kind words, and I'll just echo that. You know, a lot of these guys this past season heard from hunters, residents, non-resident hunters that we're becoming the new in my division that have done a heck of a lot of work in the last 10 years. And that's through DU projects, PR projects, everything else. But we've built some darn good duck factories here in the state, and the people know about it. And that's, you know, and I promise you, we're not going to quit doing it. So.
Not to cut you off, sorry. I just read recently a book, Grant Cardone's 10X Rule. Problems is a good thing, whereas most people, you look at a problem as a bad thing, but to create new problems, you're doing something good, you're doing something right. So Obviously that, and you have to adapt and take on those challenges. I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there. I think Kansas is a great place to hunt. We've got a wide variety of things to do. I'd like for us to keep being on the forefront of that and being a leader in the outdoor industry and conservation, because this is a great place to come. And fortunately, I live here, so.
I agree with you, Commissioner Ryder. And the last thing I might mention is, if you've noticed, I included in your packet there a Word document that kind of outlines some of the things that my division and is specifically looking at and talking about and planning for the future. We're going to circle back and talk about the issues on reservoirs and wetland pools associated with those reservoirs and a whole list of other things that relate to this topic. So it's called job security, and we take our jobs very seriously, and we'll continue to move this forward. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with staff today. It means a lot.
It was good. It was a good idea, a good meeting.
Let me just say, I know it was an inconvenience for you all to be here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was the same for these guys, but we really wanted you to hear directly from them. So I'm really pleased with this conversation.
I don't know how we could have done it any more efficiently as doing it this way.
I appreciate everybody's time. It was.
All right. See you at 1 o'clock.